I took the job because I was broke, tired, and out of better ideas. That is the cleanest way to say it. The messier version is that I was 34, behind on rent, ducking calls from my ex about money I owed for our daughter's school clothes, and burning through the last of the decent reputation I had left. I had done security work on and off for years. Bars, warehouse lots, apartment buildings, construction sites, a private school once. Nothing glamorous. Mostly standing around, checking gates, writing incident reports no one read, and pretending drunks respected a polo shirt with security on the chest. I had worked enough of those jobs to know the pattern. The respectable companies wanted clean records, updated certifications, references, and the patience to sit through all the usual training videos. The less respectable ones wanted a body in a chair and someone who could keep his mouth shut. I ended up with the second kind. The ad was plain. Night security needed for a private industrial property outside the city. Good pay. Cash bonus for reliability. Transportation preferred. No agencies. There was a number under it. I called. A man answered on the second ring. He did not tell me his name right away. He asked if I had experience working nights. I said yes. He asked if I had ever handled trespassers. I said yes. He asked if I had a problem with seeing things I was not meant to discuss with anyone outside the job. I should have hung up there. Instead, I asked what kind of things. He said, "Nothing you need to worry about if you can follow instructions." His voice was calm in a way that did not invite more questions. Not rude, just final. He gave me an address for a diner near the Ring Road and said to be there the next afternoon. I almost did not go. Then my landlord slid another printed notice under my door, and I went. The man I met at the diner looked like he had never worked a normal day in his life. Expensive coat, neat beard, hard eyes. He was maybe in his 40s, in shape without seeming like a gym addict. He introduced himself as Leon. I don't know if that was his real name. He already had coffee in front of him. He did not ask if I wanted anything. He just looked me over the way people inspect used equipment. "You ever been arrested?" he asked. I told him about the disorderly charge from years earlier after a bar fight. He nodded like he already knew. "You use drugs?" "No." That one was true. Booze had been more my problem. "You talk too much?" "Not unless I'm asked." He almost smiled at that, but not really. Then he explained the job, if you can call it that. There was a property outside city limits, an old logistics site with a warehouse, a machine shop, office space, vehicle bays, and fenced yard areas. It was now under private lease. The company name on the paperwork, he said, was not important. My duties would be to monitor the gate, patrol the main buildings, log arrivals and departures if instructed, and keep strangers off the property. I was not to ask questions about cargo, personnel, or activities occurring inside designated areas. I was not to enter certain rooms unless directly ordered. I was not to carry my phone while on patrol. I was not to take photographs. I was not to speak to police, inspectors, or anyone claiming official interest without calling a number he would provide. I asked if it was legal work. He stirred his coffee once, looked at the spoon, then set it down. He said, "That depends how much law matters to you when you need money." It was not a joke. I said nothing. He slid an envelope across the table. There was cash inside, more than I had seen at one time in months. "That's for the first week," he said. "You start tonight." I looked at the envelope, then at him. Tonight? He nodded. A car will meet you here at dusk. It should have felt like a threat. Mostly it felt like relief. That is the part I hate admitting. A lot of what happened later can be traced back to that feeling. Not greed exactly, more like surrender. I was so relieved not to be drowning for one more week that I let the obvious danger pass right in front of me and called it luck. The car that picked me up was a black sedan with tinted windows and a driver who did not speak. We left the city, past warehouse districts and truck stops, then open stretches of road lined with brush and muddy fields. The property sat well back from the road behind chain-link fencing topped with rusted wire. There were floodlights mounted on poles, but only some were working. One gate stood open when we arrived. A second man let us through. My first look at the place told me most of what I needed to know. It had once been legitimate. You could see that in the layout. There were marked loading zones, old company signage painted over in white, safety rails around certain platforms, faded directional arrows on the concrete. But it had been repurposed by people who cared only about function and privacy. New cameras had been installed in crooked lines. Heavy locks hung on doors that did not match the frames. There were long black vans parked near the loading bays with no plates on them. A chemical smell drifted from one of the side buildings, mixed with diesel and old standing water. The driver walked me to a small office near the gate and left me there with another man named Pavel. Pavel was thick through the shoulders, shaved head, busted nose, heavy accent I could not place. He wore a dark jacket with no markings and a pistol at his hip in plain view. He did not bother pretending we were part of a normal business. He handed me a flashlight, a ring of keys, a radio, and a clipboard with blank log sheets. He pointed out a grainy monitor setup showing camera feeds from the yard, the gate, a hallway, and the outer warehouse floor. "You watch gate," he said. "You make rounds. Outside, office hall, vehicle bay, fence line up to west corner. You stay out of building C. You stay out of basement. If someone tells you open gate, you open gate. If stranger comes, you say private property and send away. If police come, call this number first, then me." He tapped a card on the desk. "What happens in building C?" I asked. He looked at me as if I had already failed some test. "Not your concern." I should say here that the place did not look like a haunted house or some carnival version of evil. That is what makes it worse in memory. It looked like a business trying to hide itself. Dirty floors, forklift marks, broken pallets stacked by a wall, office chairs with torn arms, vending machines unplugged and standing empty. Real places are always uglier than stories make them. I signed nothing. No contract, no tax forms, no badge. By the time full dark settled in, I was sitting in that gate office with bad coffee from a hot plate and a loaded feeling in my chest that I kept trying to mistake for nerves about a new job. The first night was quiet enough to fool me. A few vehicles came and went. Each time someone called ahead on the radio and gave me a short code. I opened the gate, wrote down whatever plate or vehicle description I could see, and kept my eyes low. The men inside did not act like laborers or drivers. They moved with the kind of alertness I had only seen in bouncers waiting for trouble, or men who expected violence as part of the day. Two of them had blood on their sleeves at one point. One laughed about something as he passed my office window, and I heard the laugh stop all at once, like someone had pressed a mute button. On patrol, I kept to the routes Pavel had described. The warehouse floor was mostly empty except for shrink-wrapped crates and steel shelving. The vehicle bay held 2 vans, a flatbed truck, and bins of tools. The office hall had been stripped down except for a conference room with blacked-out windows and a locked records room. Every few minutes I would hear noises through the walls that did not line up with what I could see on the monitors. Metal dragging, short bursts of shouting. Something heavy dropped and then rolled a little before stopping. Once, while walking past the door marked Building C Access, I heard a man crying on the other side. Not loud, not dramatic, just the kind of crying someone does when they are past control and nearly out of breath. I stopped. The handle was chained and locked. The crying stopped too, as if whoever was inside had heard me. I stood there longer than I should have. I remember noticing a scrape on the floor under the door, a faint dark mark that could have been grease except it was too brown. My radio cracked and Pavel's voice came through. "Keep moving." So I moved. When dawn came, Leon showed up in the same coat, same unreadable face. He asked if I had any problems. I said no. He counted money into my hand right there in the office, more than promised. He said, "Be back tonight." And I was. That is the other ugly truth. I saw enough the first shift to know I was standing on rotten ground, and I still came back because the money felt like air to someone choking. The second night I started learning the rhythms. There was a kitchen area where some of the men gathered to smoke and drink bitter coffee from paper cups. They spoke in low voices in a mix of English and other languages I did not know. They did not include me, but after a while they stopped treating me like furniture. One of them, a young guy called Nico with bad skin and a gold tooth, asked if I had military experience. I said no. He said that was probably better. Another man told him to shut up. A woman came in around midnight in a gray SUV, wearing slacks and a leather jacket. She looked like an accountant until you noticed the broken knuckle on one hand and the way every man on site made room for her without being told. She went straight to the office wing. Later I saw her arguing with Leon through the glass of the conference room. No sound, just tight faces and sharp gestures. When she left, she passed close enough to me for me to smell cigarette smoke and expensive perfume. She said, "You're new." I said yes. She looked at my clipboard and then at my face. "Don't get curious," she said. Then she walked out. That advice would have been useful if curiosity were the only force pulling at me. It was more basic than that. Human beings notice when something is wrong. We notice the shape of it, even when we do not know the details. The property was full of signs of pain, fear, and damage. You could feel that in the way doors were reinforced from the outside, in the mop bucket that always smelled like bleach and iron, in the men who came out of Building C breathing hard and refusing eye contact. By the fourth night, I knew there were prisoners on the site. I did not know who they were or why they were there. At that point, I still thought maybe I was dealing with some trafficking operation, stolen goods, maybe debt collection and intimidation, criminal things, terrible things, but still things with motives I could understand. It took longer to accept that some of the people running that place simply liked hurting others. I found out by accident there was a section of hallway behind the vehicle bay that I had not entered because one of the doors stuck, and Pavel had told me to leave it alone. During patrol, I noticed water leaking from under that door. I went back for a mop and bucket, figuring if someone slipped it would somehow become my problem. When I shoved the door open with my shoulder, I found a tiled utility corridor that smelled like mildew and old pipes. At the far end was another door, this one partly open. I heard a chain clink. Then a voice said, "Please." Not shouted. Barely a voice at all. I should have turned around. Instead, I walked down there and pushed the door wider. Inside was a room no bigger than a storage closet. There was a drain in the center of the floor, a metal chair bolted down, hooks on one wall, a work table with straps attached. The whole room was lit by a single bare bulb. A man sat on the floor in the corner, with one ankle cuffed to a ring in the wall. His face looked wrong at first, because one eye was swollen shut, and the other was sunk deep in bruises. His lips were split. There were burns on his neck, round and dark. His hands shook when he tried to lift one toward me. "Please," he said again. "Water." I stood there frozen, mop handle in one hand, staring like an idiot. He was maybe 50. His hair had gone gray at the temples. He looked less like some hardened criminal than a mechanic or a small business owner. Someone's uncle. Someone who had probably driven to work every day for 20 years and complained about taxes and lowball customers. I had seen injured people before. Bar fights, traffic accidents, one construction worker who fell off scaffolding. This was different. This was deliberate work, done slowly. I set the bucket down and reached for a plastic jug on the table. It was half full. I held it out. Before the man could touch it, someone hit me in the side of the head so hard I dropped to one knee. I heard the bucket slam into the wall. Water spread across the tiles. Pavel grabbed the back of my jacket and yanked me upright. He looked angrier than I had seen anyone look in years, but there was restraint under it, which scared me more. It meant he was deciding how far to go. "What did I tell you?" he said. I said there was a leak. He hit me in the stomach. Not wild, controlled, enough to fold me. "You see leak. You call. You do not come in here. You do not speak to him." I nodded because I could not breathe enough to answer. Pavel dragged me out into the corridor and shoved me against the wall. He stepped close, his face inches from mine. "Listen now. You got good pay because you are not stupid. Don't become stupid. You are here to watch gates and walk routes. That man in there is dead already. You understand? Maybe tonight, maybe next week, but dead. You give him water, you give him hope. Hope makes problems. I wish I could say I shoved him or quit on the spot or did something brave. I did not. I coughed, held my side, and said I understood. He stared at me for another few seconds, then pointed back toward the office. "Clean yourself up. Finish shift." That should have been the end for me. A line crossed so clearly that even a desperate man would step back. Instead, I went into the bathroom, washed blood from the corner of my mouth, and finished the shift with my hands shaking every time I touched the clipboard. The thing people do not like hearing is that staying in bad situations becomes easier once you have already accepted a smaller version of them. The mind bargains. You say, "I'm not one of them. I'm just here." You say, "I need one more week." You say, "I'll leave when I have enough saved." You say a lot of things that help you sleep a few hours. I told myself I would take the next pay and disappear. Then my daughter needed antibiotics, and I sent money to her mother and stayed another week. It did not take long for the place to show me more. The first body I saw was in the loading yard. The first dead one I understood was dead because of them. A van pulled in near dawn with its rear doors tied shut using a ratchet strap. 2 men opened it and rolled out a carpet wrapped in clear plastic. The shape inside was man-sized and loose at the joints. One end of the carpet had gone dark where liquid had gathered. They did not notice me at first. I was near the gate box, partly hidden by a concrete barrier. Nico saw me and grinned like he had caught me peeking backstage at a magic trick. "Nothing to write down," he said. I looked at the plastic. There was a hand pressing against it from the inside, but not moving. Just trapped there by the wrap, fingers bent wrong. Leon came out of the warehouse and saw where I was looking. He walked over, not hurried, hands in his coat pockets. "You look pale," he said. I didn't answer. He stopped beside me and looked at the wrapped shape the way someone might inspect old furniture before deciding whether to throw it out. "This is where men like you make mistakes," he said. "They think seeing something means they have become part of it. That is not true. It means they have a choice. Quiet men get paid and go home. Loud men create extra work." He looked at me then, direct and flat. "Do you understand?" I said yes. He nodded once and walked away. That day I did not go straight home. I drove around for an hour with the heater on low and my hands locked to the wheel. I considered going to the police. I even parked once outside a station and sat there. But every practical thought came at me at once. I had no names that were real, no paperwork, no proof except bruises and what I had seen. I had taken cash under the table. I had stood watch while God knew what had happened inside that place. If the police were clean, I might get buried with the rest of it. If they were not clean, I might disappear before sunset. Maybe that sounds like an excuse. It probably is. Fear is full of practical language. A week after that, I learned about the basement. There was an old freight elevator near the rear warehouse wall. It only worked when someone unlocked a panel beside it with a separate key I did not have. Most nights nobody used it. Then one shift I saw the woman in the leather jacket arrive with 2 men carrying a third between them. The third man was still alive. I know because his shoes scraped, and he was trying weakly to twist away. His face was covered with a black hood wet around the mouth. They took him to the freight elevator. The woman saw me watching and said, "You didn't see him." Then the doors closed. After that, I started hearing things under the floor in certain parts of the building. Not ghost sounds, mechanical noises, boots on steps, someone yelling once, very far down, a dull pop that might have been a suppressed gunshot or some tool discharge. The basement was real. It was active. Whatever happened there was important enough that even Pavel stayed tense when that elevator moved. I wish I could tell this in a straight line, each horror building neatly on the last one. That is not how it felt. It was messy. Long stretches of nothing, paper cups, cigarette smoke, mud on boots, men joking in a language I did not know. Then suddenly a smear of blood on a door frame, a gagged woman led across a hallway, a trash bag split open in a bin behind the shop showing strips of clothing stiff with dark stains. The worst part for me was not knowing the full shape of it, while still knowing enough. I started having trouble sleeping. When I did sleep, I would jerk awake sure I had heard the gate buzzer or the chain on that prisoner's ankle. I drank more, My ex noticed something was wrong and asked if I was gambling again. I said no. She asked where the money was coming from. I told her night work at a private yard. She said it sounded shady. I told her she wanted the money, not the explanation. That shut her up and made me feel like garbage immediately after. I kept going in. One night there was a storm, heavy rain and wind slamming at the fencing. Water pooled in the yard, reflecting the floodlights in broken strips. Power flickered twice. The cameras went black for a few seconds and came back grainier than before. Pavel was in a worse mood than usual. Leon was not on site. The woman was there, moving between the office wing and Building C, taking calls on 2 phones. Men were loading crates into a truck faster than usual, slipping in the rain, shouting at each other. It felt like something was being shut down or moved. Around the middle of the shift, Nico came into the gate office soaked to the skin and smelling like wet wool and sweat. "You got cigarettes?" he asked. I tossed him my pack. He lit one with shaking hands. He was younger than I had first thought, maybe 23, 24. Rain had plastered his hair to his forehead. There was a cut near his ear. He smoked half the cigarette in 3 drags and looked at the monitors without really seeing them. "You should leave," he said. I stared at him. "What?" He laughed once, no humor in it. "You think you're invisible because you stand by gate. You're not. They keep everyone until they're done with them." "Who's they?" He glanced toward the door, lowered his voice. "You ask too late." Before I could say anything else, Pavel called him on the radio. Nico crushed the cigarette in my coffee cup and left. I did not see him again for 2 days. When he came back, he was limping and would not meet my eyes. I should say something about the people they brought in. Most were men, different ages. A few looked rough enough that I could tell myself they were gang guys or connected to whatever business Leon and the others were running. A few looked ordinary in ways that bothered me deeply. One had the pale wristbands of a hospital patient still on him. One wore a delivery company jacket. One was in dress shoes and a stained button-down shirt like he had been taken after leaving an office. There were women too, though less often. I only saw 3 for certain. One was led through the hallway with her hands taped in front and blood on one side of her face. Another came in on a stretcher and never moved. The third is the one I still think about most because she looked at me like I could stop it. She was young, maybe late 20s, dark hair cut to the shoulders, jeans and a sweater soaked in mud. They brought her through the vehicle bay with a hood over her head, but it slipped when one of the men jerked her by the arm. She turned toward my voice when I said, "Watch the step." And for 1 second our eyes met. Her mouth was swollen. One nostril was packed with dried blood. She was terrified, yes, but there was still fight in her. She tried to pull free, and one of the men slammed her into the side of the van so hard her head bounced off the metal. I took a step forward before I could think better of it. Pavel's hand landed on my shoulder from behind. "Don't," he said quietly. That quiet voice scared me more than when he yelled. The woman looked from me to him and back. She understood. I saw it happen. She saw exactly what I was. Not help, not rescue, just another man standing there while her life closed in around her. They took her to the basement. Later that same shift, I heard screaming from below. Not long. It stopped too suddenly. I threw up behind the generator shed. A week after the storm, everything changed. Until then, I had lived in a bad compromise. I knew terrible things were happening, but none of the violence had been aimed fully at me. I was useful, separate enough to pretend I might step away at the right moment. That illusion ended with Nico. He came into the gate office near dawn, looking like a man who had already decided something and hated himself for it. He shut the door behind him. His right hand was stuffed in the pocket of his jacket. I thought he might have a gun. Instead, he pulled out a flash drive. He set it on the desk beside the log sheets. "What's this?" I asked. "Insurance," he said. "For who?" "Maybe you. Maybe me." He kept glancing at the window. "Listen, there are files on there. Names, video, accounts, routes. I copied what I could. Not enough. Maybe enough. I need out." I stared at the drive like it might burn me. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I'm not making it alone." He spoke fast now, whispering through his teeth. "There's a transport tomorrow night. They move records and money south. Leon goes. Woman too. Less people here. Basement still staffed but thin. We take car from the back lot and go. You hold this till then." I should have said no. Every instinct I had left was yelling no. Instead, I asked, "Why not go now?" His face did something ugly then. A flash of panic so honest it made him look like a child. "Because they know I took something. They just don't know what. If I run now, they come fast. If I stay till tomorrow, maybe they think I'm clean. Maybe." That word hung there between us. I said, "Why trust me?" He gave me a look I have never forgotten. "Because you still flinch." Then he left the drive on the desk and walked out. I picked it up and held it in my palm. Tiny thing, cheap plastic, light as nothing. It felt absurd that so much fear could sit inside something so small. I should have taken it straight to the police right then. I know that. I know it. But fear makes time feel different. It turns every decision into a doorway with fire behind it and darkness ahead. I hid the drive in the lining of my jacket and finished the shift, trying not to look at anyone. When Leon arrived that morning, he did not seem different. Neither did Pavel. Nobody searched me. Nobody stopped me at the gate. I drove home with the flash drive digging against my ribs through the jacket and spent the day in my apartment with the curtains closed, staring at my old laptop on the table. It took me hours to work up the nerve to plug it in. What was on it was worse than I expected and more organized. Folders of scanned IDs, passport photos, wire transfers, shipping manifests, maps with hand-marked routes, still images from security cameras, clips from phones. Some of the videos were the property. Hallways I knew. Rooms I did not. Men tied to chairs. A body on a concrete floor with plastic wrapped around the head. One clip showed the basement from a corner angle. A man hung by his wrists, while someone off camera asked questions in a bored voice. When the answers stopped, the beating started. Efficient. Practiced. Savage. I watched maybe 10 seconds and closed the file. There were names too. A lot of them. Some I recognized from the site. Others looked like clients, payments, contacts. I saw columns of dates and figures that made it clear this operation was not small. extortion, kidnapping, enforcement, maybe contract killings, maybe trafficking, maybe all of it. Then I found a folder labeled Cleanup. Inside were images of places that were not the property. A garage with blood sprayed up one wall, a motel room mattress carved open, a man face down in a ditch, the back of his head gone, a woman in a restaurant freezer with both hands missing. These were not warnings or rough beatings. These were murders done for purpose and, I think in some cases, pleasure. One photo made me stop breathing for a second. It was Nico. Not dead. Seated at a table looking at paperwork while Leon stood over him. The timestamp file name suggested it was taken months earlier. Nico looked cleaner, heavier, calmer. Under the image was a scanned page with notes about his family. Mother, sister, home address. Insurance, I thought. On everyone. I copied the files to my laptop and a second old USB stick I had in a drawer. Then I sat there all afternoon drinking warm beer and listening to cars pass outside, trying to decide whether leaving town immediately would save me or only make me easier to track. I did not go to work that night. At first, nothing happened. No calls, no knocks. Around evening, I started to think maybe I had a few hours to plan. Then my phone rang from a blocked number. I let it ring out. It rang again. I answered. Leon said, "You're not at work." His tone was mild, which made it worse. I said I was sick. He said, "Open your front door." I looked at the door. 3 soft knocks came from the other side. My blood went cold so fast it felt like pain. I did not move. Leon stayed on the line. He said, "Open it, or Pavel will break it, and that will upset the neighbors." I opened the door. Pavel stood there with another man I had never seen before, tall and broad, wearing a rain jacket though it was dry out. Pavel smiled with one side of his mouth. Leon spoke through the phone. "Invite them in." I stepped back. They came in and closed the door behind them. Pavel took the phone from my hand, ended the call, and set it on the table. He looked around my apartment the way a man looks at a hotel room he does not intend to sleep in. "You don't come to work," he said. "Bad decision." I said I was sick. He backhanded me so hard my ear rang. Don't lie. The other man had already started opening cupboards, looking under cushions, checking the bedroom. Calm, methodical. He was not searching for drugs or guns. He was searching for one small thing. Pavel stepped close. "What did Nico give you?" I said nothing. He drove his fist into my stomach, and when I folded, he kneed me in the face. I went down against the couch, blood spilling from my nose onto the floorboards. He crouched beside me. "This is your chance to make life longer," he said. "Not better, just longer." The other man called from the bedroom. Nothing. Pavel looked at the laptop on the table. My heart kicked so hard I thought I might black out. He stood and walked over to it. The screen was dark. He opened it, pressed a key. The password prompt came up. He looked at me. "Open it." I did. My fingers left blood on the keys. He watched the desktop load. My copied files were hidden in a folder inside another folder with a boring name, but I knew if they had time they would find them. Pavel looked at the browser history first, then documents, then downloads. He was not quick with computers, but he knew enough. The other man came back from the bedroom holding my jacket. My spare USB stick was still in the lining pocket because I had panicked and forgotten it. He held it up. Pavel took it, turned it between his fingers, and looked at me. That was the moment I understood I was already dead, unless something unpredictable happened. Pavel plugged the stick into the laptop. When the folders opened, he did not react right away. Then his jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone and called someone. He spoke in his own language for maybe 20 seconds, listening more than talking. Then he hung up. He said, "Get up." I stayed on the floor. He kicked me in the ribs. I heard something crack or pop and rolled onto my side, gasping. "Get up." I managed it with one hand on the couch. Pavel nodded to the other man. They each took an arm and walked me out of my own apartment while I dripped blood down my shirt. No one in the hallway opened a door. People hear trouble and become deaf. I do not blame them. I probably would have done the same. They put me in the back of a dark SUV and zip-tied my wrists. Pavel sat beside me. The other man drove. Nobody talked on the ride. I knew where we were going before the gates came into view. The property looked different when you arrived as cargo. Meaner. Smaller somehow. The lights harsher. The fencing closer. When they dragged me from the SUV, I noticed fresh mud in the yard and one section of ground torn up by tires. The air smelled strongly of bleach. They took me not to the gate office, not to Building C, but straight through the warehouse to the freight elevator. My legs nearly stopped under me then. Pavel shoved me forward. The basement was larger than I had imagined. Concrete corridors, low ceiling, exposed pipes, rooms branching off both sides. Some had heavy steel doors with sliding view panels. Others were simple utility spaces turned to new purposes. There was a generator room, a storage room stacked with plastic sheeting and cleaning supplies, and one area set up like an office with folding tables, laptops, a printer, and phones. The worst room was near the end of the hall. They took me there and sat me in a chair bolted to the floor. Not the same chair as upstairs, but the same idea. Straps hung from the arms. There was dried brown-black staining around the drain. The smell was metal, bleach, sweat, and something sweet rotten under it all. Leon came in a few minutes later, carrying my USB stick. He looked tired for the first time since I had met him. "This disappointed me," he said. I laughed once through blood and a broken feeling in my side. It came out like a cough. He ignored it. "Where is the original?" I said I didn't know what he meant. Pavel hit me from behind so hard the chair jolted. Leon held up one hand and Pavel stopped. "This isn't personal," Leon said. "That's the mistake people make. They think because something ugly happens, it must be emotional. It usually isn't. This is housekeeping. You were paid very well to do very little. Instead, you involved yourself." He leaned down, close enough for me to smell mint and coffee on his breath. "Where is the original?" I told him the truth for once, at home, on the laptop. He studied me and knew I was lying. "Bring Nico," he said. Pavel left. Leon sat across from me on a rolling stool like we were about to do paperwork. He asked me if I had sent any files to anyone. I said no. He asked if I had spoken to police. No. He asked if I had family who might become curious if I disappeared. I said yes, but not the kind who could do anything. He nodded. That at least was honest. When they brought Nico in, he had already been worked over. His left eye was nearly closed and his lower lip hung split to the chin. His hands were zip-tied in front. He looked at me once with hate so pure it shocked me. Not because I had betrayed him, but because he knew I was weak enough to get caught. Leon asked him where the original drive was. Nico spat blood on the floor. Pavel punched him in the kidney. He folded but stayed standing. Leon asked again. Nico said something in another language that made Pavel smile in a bad way. Then they started on him. I am going to say this plainly because plain is how I remember it. Pavel broke Nico's fingers one by one with a pair of locking pliers, while Leon kept asking the same question. Another man held Nico upright when his legs gave out. Nico screamed until his voice tore raw, then made ugly animal sounds, then panted and whimpered and tried to bite through whatever was in his mouth when they gagged him. When he still would not answer, Pavel took a box cutter and opened the skin along Nico's thigh in one long cut. Not deep enough to kill. Just deep enough to make blood run fast and pain flood everything. I shouted for them to stop. I think I said I would tell them where it was. I would have said anything. Leon looked at me but did not tell Pavel to stop. He said, "I don't believe you know." That was the truth. I did not know where Nico had hidden the original, if he had hidden it at all. The one he gave me had been the original as far as I knew. Finally, Nico sagged against the man holding him and made a sound through the gag that was no longer language. Leon nodded once. Pavel stepped behind him and cut his throat. It happened so fast after all the other pain that my mind lagged. 1 second, Nico was shaking and trying to breathe. The next, there was a hard, wet sound and a sheet of blood down the front of his shirt. He dropped to his knees, then sideways. He kicked twice. His shoes scraped the floor. Blood spread toward the drain in a red fan and then darkened. The room went very quiet. Leon looked at the body for a moment, then back at me. "Now," he said, "think carefully." I did think. Harder than I had thought in years. I realized 2 things at once. First, they were not leaving this room with me alive unless they suddenly needed me for some reason. Second, the only reason I was still breathing at all was uncertainty. I said the original drive was in a storage locker I rented under another name. That was a lie, but a useful one. Specific enough to follow. Hard enough to check immediately that it bought time. Leon asked where. I gave him the name of a facility near the freeway. I had rented a unit there once after my divorce. I even gave him a plausible unit number from memory. He watched my face the whole time. If I overplayed it, I was dead. If I undersold it, I was dead. Pavel wrapped a rag around Nico's throat stump and cursed about the mess. Another man started mopping around the body like this was routine, which I suppose it was. Leon stood. "If you're lying," he said, "I'll kill your ex-wife first and make you hear it." Then he left. That threat did more to me than the beating. Until then, I had been thinking only in terms of myself. Pain narrows a person. The moment he said her, and by extension our daughter, something colder settled into me. fear turned into a kind of hard clarity. Pavel stayed behind with me while Leon and 2 others went upstairs. Nico's body was zipped into a heavy plastic bag and dragged out. The blood smear left behind looked almost black in the basement light. Pavel lit a cigarette even with the smell already choking the room. "You should have stayed guard," he said. I did not answer. He smoked and watched me. After a while he said, "Men like Leon, they always think too much. Complications. You know what I think?" I said nothing. He smiled at the floor. "I think dead is simple." He stepped behind me, and I thought that was it. But instead of cutting my throat, he loosened one wrist strap to reposition it. He had done this enough times that he was careless. Not fully careless. Just bored. My right hand was swollen and numb, but I felt the give. He stepped away to answer a call on his phone. He spoke low and irritated, half turned from me. The cigarette burned between 2 fingers. I pulled. The strap tightened, then slipped a little more over my wrist because of the blood and sweat. I twisted until fire shot through my hand. Another half-inch. Pavel kept talking. I pulled again. Skin tore. I got my hand free. I moved without planning beyond the first second. I came up out of the chair with one arm still partly trapped, swung the metal armrest assembly sideways, and hit Pavel in the knee. It made a thick cracking sound. He went down with a roar, phone skidding away. I grabbed the cigarette from his hand and jammed it into his eye. He screamed and clawed at his face. I got the other strap off and lunged for the work table where I had seen tools. There was a utility knife, a stapler, a wrench, a roll of tape. I took the wrench because it fit my hand and turned as Pavel came at me blind with one hand over his ruined eye. I hit him in the temple. He staggered but did not fall. I hit him again. The third blow dropped him to one knee. He was still trying to reach for the pistol at his hip. I brought the wrench down on his hand. Bones broke. The pistol fell. I kicked it away and hit him again and again until he stopped making human sounds. This is the part I have replayed most. Not because I regret defending myself. I do not. I replay it because of how quickly a man becomes meat once you decide not to stop. His scalp opened. Teeth came out. The side of his head flattened in a way that should not happen outside of machinery. Blood and something pale streaked the floor and my arm. When I finally stopped, I was panting over him with the wrench hanging loose in my hand, and there was almost nothing left in his face I recognized. I took his pistol, spare magazine, keys, radio, and phone. Then I ran. The basement corridor was empty. Alarms had not sounded yet. Either no one had heard him over the generator hum and thick walls, or they assumed the noise was normal. I should have gone straight for the elevator, but I made another mistake shaped like conscience. I checked the steel doors. Behind the first was an empty room with a stained mattress on the floor. Behind the second was a man chained to a pipe, too weak to stand. He flinched from the light. I tried keys, found one that worked, and got the chain off. He asked where to go. I said up, out, Gate Road. I do not know if he made it. The third room held no one alive. There was a body under a tarp in the corner. A foot stuck out, blackened at the toes. Then I heard shouting from above, and the freight elevator clanking down. I ran toward the stairwell instead. The stairs came up behind Building C. I burst through a fire door into a storage room full of wrapped pallets and nearly collided with the young woman from before, the one who had looked at me in the bay. For a second I thought I was hallucinating. Then I saw the cuff around one wrist, connected to a length of chain someone must have anchored while moving her. She had gotten loose from wherever they were holding her and was trying to work the chain free from a metal rack. She stared at the pistol in my hand and the blood all over me. "Please," she said. I shot the chain where it linked to the rack. The sound in that enclosed space was brutal. My ears rang. The first shot missed. The second snapped the link. She jerked back, wide-eyed. "Come on," I said. We ran. By then the whole site had shifted into violence. Men were yelling on radios. A siren started somewhere in the warehouse and cut out. I heard Leon's voice once, sharp and furious. We cut through the vehicle bay and saw one body already down near the vans. A man clutching his neck and leaking blood between his fingers. The prisoner I had freed from the basement staggered across the yard and was tackled by 2 guards near the fence. One guard drove something into his side again and again until he stopped moving. The woman with me made a sound but kept running. We almost reached the gate when the tall man from my apartment stepped from behind the office corner with a shotgun. He fired once. The blast hit the concrete barrier beside us and sprayed chips into my face. I shoved the woman down behind a parked forklift and fired back with Pavel's pistol. I missed twice. The third shot hit him somewhere high in the chest or shoulder. He stumbled and fell against the office wall. We ran for the gate controls. The woman yelled that she could climb if I opened the pedestrian latch. I smacked the button for the rolling gate instead. Nothing happened. Power cut or manual lockout. Behind us, boots pounded on concrete. I grabbed the key ring from Pavel and jammed keys into the pedestrian gate lock one after another, while the woman looked over her shoulder and swore. A bullet sparked off the fence post near my head. Another punched through the gate office window. The fourth key turned. We shoved through the gate and ran into the ditch beyond the access road, just as a van engine roared to life inside the yard. We crawled through mud and weeds on our bellies while headlights swung over the fence line. The woman was breathing in hard, broken pulls, trying not to sob. Her chain dragged and snagged on roots. I wrapped it around my arm to keep it from rattling. There was a drainage culvert under the road 50 yards down. We made it there just before the van came out the main gate. From inside the culvert, we watched tires splash past and heard men shouting for lights on the west field. We stayed in filthy water and runoff until full daylight. The woman finally told me her name was Sarah. She had been taken 4 days earlier from a parking lot outside a clinic where she worked reception. She said she thought it was because of her brother. He had run numbers for men connected to Leon and had stolen from them before disappearing. They took Sarah because they could not find him. She asked if they would go after her mother too. I said yes. That honesty made her go silent. We had 1 pistol, 5 rounds left, Pavel's phone, my smashed phone, blood drying on both of us, and no real plan. We walked through fields until we reached a service road, then a truck stop. I wanted to call police. Sarah said no police until we had the files. I said the files were on my laptop. She looked at me like I was insane for not bringing it. She was right. I used Pavel's phone to call my ex first. She answered angry and turned terrified as soon as she heard my voice. I told her to take our daughter and go to her sister's place in another district right away. No questions. Leave the car if she had to. Just go. Something in my tone made her listen. Then I called an old friend named Curtis. Curtis had done repossession work and some private security. He was not clean in every sense, but he was solid in the old-fashioned way. If he said he would come, he came. We had not spoken much in a year, but he answered. He heard 2 sentences and said, "Where are you?" He picked us up outside the truck stop in a rusted pickup. He took one look at us and said, "Jesus Christ." At Curtis's place, a 1-story house with a detached garage on the edge of an industrial block, I showered while Sarah cut the cuff from her wrist with bolt cutters from his workbench. Curtis cleaned and wrapped the gash on her scalp and taped my ribs tight enough that I nearly passed out. Then we sat at his kitchen table, and I told him most of the truth. Not all. At that point, I was still ashamed of how long I had stayed. Curtis listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "You understand this is not something we solve by waving a badge at it." I said I knew. He asked if the files were enough to bring the whole thing down. I said maybe. He rubbed his chin and stared at the table. "Then we go get them before they burn everything." That afternoon, we drove to my apartment in Curtis's pickup with stolen plates from one of his impound jobs. I expected watchers outside. There were none. That scared me more. It meant Leon and the others were busy containing the site, moving bodies, fixing leaks. Inside my apartment, the place had been torn further apart after they took me. Mattress slashed, drawers dumped, the laptop gone. I nearly put my fist through the wall. Then I remembered the cloud backup. Not for the videos. Those files were too large and I had no paid storage. But the documents and a lot of the photos had synced automatically to an old email account because I had dragged them into the wrong folder in panic. Stupid luck. The only kind I got. Using Curtis's desktop back at his house, I logged in and found enough material to matter. Names, transfers, locations, partial images. Not the full proof of the torture rooms, but enough to point hard in the right direction. Sarah said it still would not be enough if local police were touched. We needed someone outside. Press. Federal. Anybody harder to bury. Curtis knew a woman named Denise who worked as an investigator for a state-level anti-corruption office. Not his friend exactly, but someone who owed him for a favor involving her brother years earlier. He called. She did not answer. He left a message with almost nothing in it except his name and the words "urgent" and "dirty cops" possible. Then we waited. Waiting is where fear really chews on you. Action gives shape to panic. Waiting lets it spread. By evening, Curtis had boarded his front windows and laid out guns on the table like tools for a repair. Sarah sat on the couch holding a coffee mug with both hands, though the coffee had gone cold. I kept checking the street through a slit in the blinds. Around dusk, Pavel's phone buzzed. One message. A picture. My ex-wife's car outside her sister's building. Under it, Leon had typed, "Wrong move." I do not remember deciding anything after that. I only remember motion. Curtis tried to stop me from going out alone. Sarah said if Leon had found them once, he would find them again. Denise still had not called back. The world narrowed into one terrible, simple fact. If I waited for proper channels, my family would die. We used Pavel's phone to text back from his number. I wrote that I had the full drive, the videos, all of it. I said if anything happened to my family, copies would go public. I said I wanted trade and safe exit. Leon responded faster than I expected. You are in no position to negotiate. I sent one of the better documents, a page of names and account figures. Then I wrote, "Try me." That bought silence for nearly an hour. Then he sent an address. An old slaughterhouse on the east edge of the freight district, long closed, half derelict. He wrote, "Midnight. Bring drive. Alone." Curtis said it was a kill box. Of course it was. Sarah said good. That meant Leon was not sure where we were or what we truly had. We argued. In the end, the plan we made was desperate and thin, but all we had. I would go invisible with a dummy drive. Curtis and Sarah would position outside with his hunting rifle and the second pistol. Denise, if she ever called back, would get an email dump scheduled to send automatically, unless I canceled it from Curtis's computer by a certain time. We set that up with what files we had, and a long message naming the property, the basement, Leon, Pavel, vehicle descriptions, every detail I could remember. Then Denise finally called. Curtis put her on speaker. He gave her the short version. She listened in dead silence and then asked for the address of the property first, not the slaughterhouse. Good sign. Serious people go for evidence, not drama. She said she could not promise anything fast, but if what we sent checked out, she could move on it with people outside local channels. She told us not to do anything stupid. We thanked her and then did something stupid anyway. The slaughterhouse smelled like mold, oil, and old rotten insulation. Most of the outer windows were boarded. One loading door stood partly open. I went in with the dummy drive in my pocket and a cheap phone Curtis had given me taped under my shirt. Live call open so he and Sarah could hear what they could hear. Inside, the place was a shell of concrete bays and rusted rails overhead where carcasses had once hung. Rain dripped through holes in the roof. My footsteps sounded too loud. Leon stepped out from behind a support column with two men flanking him. The woman in the leather jacket was there too, smoking like this was all beneath her. No sign of my ex or daughter. I stopped 15 feet away. "Where are they?" Leon said. "Safe enough, depending on you." I said I wanted proof. He nodded to the woman. She held up a phone showing a live video feed of a dim room. My ex sat on a chair with her hands bound behind it. She had a bruise on one cheek. My daughter was not visible. I nearly rushed them right then, which would have killed everyone. "Where is my daughter?" "With her," Leon said. "Off camera. She's frightened. Don't make this worse." I forced myself still. "You get the drive when I hear their voices." He considered, then nodded again. The woman switched the phone audio. My ex said my name once, voice shaking. Then I heard my daughter crying in the background and saying she wanted to go home. That sound went through me like a nail. Leon held out his hand. "Drive." I tossed it to him. He gave it to one of the men, who plugged it into a laptop on a crate nearby. We all waited. The man clicked through the empty decoy folders with his jaw tightening. He looked up. Leon's face barely changed. "I admire the effort," he said. Then the shooting started. Curtis fired first from somewhere outside through a side window gap. One of Leon's men went backward with half his neck gone. The woman in the leather jacket dropped behind a crate, drawing her pistol as she fell. I dove behind a hanging rail support, while bullets snapped through rusted metal. and concrete chips stung my face. The space turned deaf with gunfire. Leon moved fast, lower than I expected, disappearing behind equipment toward the rear hall. I chased because reason had broken by then. I caught up to him in a corridor lined with old tiled walls and empty hooks. He fired once over his shoulder and missed. I threw myself into him before he could turn clean. We hit the floor hard. The pistol skidded away. Leon was stronger than he looked and colder than anyone I have ever touched. No wasted motion. He jammed his thumb into the cut above my eye, drove a knee into my ribs, and nearly rolled free. I bit his hand. He punched my throat. We crashed into a wheeled metal rack that came down with a shriek. He reached a knife from inside his coat. Short, fixed blade. I grabbed his wrist with both hands as he drove it down. The tip touched my chest and started to punch through fabric. I could smell his breath, hear both of us making ugly, desperate sounds. We were past style, past skill. It was just force and leverage and hate. I twisted his wrist toward the broken tile edge of the wall. The knife sank into his own side up to the guard. He made a shocked sound more than a scream. I shoved again. The blade went deeper. He tried to pull away, but I was on top of him then, hands slippery, pressing with everything I had left. His eyes stayed locked on mine the whole time, furious and unbelieving. He coughed blood onto my chin. When I let go, he tried weakly to reach for the knife handle. I picked up a broken length of pipe from the floor and beat him until his arm stopped moving. I do not know how many times. By the time I stood, he was not a person anymore in any useful sense. His face had split open above one cheek. Teeth showed through torn skin. Blood was everywhere. The pipe stuck to my hand because my fingers had cramped around it. The shooting in the main bay had mostly stopped. I ran back and found Curtis crouched behind a conveyor housing, reloading with bloody hands. He had taken a grazing hit across the scalp. One of Leon's men lay dead near the loading door. The woman in the leather jacket was gone. "Where's Sarah?" I shouted. He pointed toward the office block attached to the slaughterhouse. I found Sarah in a cramped manager's office fighting the woman like two trapped animals. The woman had her by the hair, smashing her face against a desk while reaching for a dropped pistol under a radiator. Sarah had a box cutter in one hand, cutting wild at whatever she could reach. I hit the woman once with the pipe across the back. She dropped to one knee, turned, and almost got the pistol anyway. Sarah slashed her throat open before she could raise it. The cut was deep but messy. Blood poured over the front of the woman's shirt and onto her hands as if she were trying to hold herself together. She made a wet, choking sound and stumbled into the desk, knocking a lamp and stack of papers to the floor. Then she slid down the wall and died, glaring at us both. Sarah sat where she was, shaking so hard her teeth clicked. She kept saying, "Is she dead? Is she dead?" Like the answer might change. We found my ex and daughter in a refrigerated locker room off the back corridor with one guard outside, who had been called away by the shooting and never made it back before Curtis shot him through the window in the door. My ex had rope burns on her wrists, and my daughter would not look at me at first because I was covered in blood, and she did not understand what she was seeing. That hurt more than the beating. After that, it became pure aftermath. Sirens came in layers. First local, then more, then vehicles without markings. Denise had done whatever she could do quickly, and maybe the scheduled email dump helped force hands. The property was hit before dawn with enough force that whoever remained there either ran or died trying. I learned later that they found the basement, the rooms, the drains, the records they had not moved, and more bodies than they released publicly. Some of Leon's network vanished. Some were arrested months later in other cities. Some, I am certain, were protected and quietly stepped away. That is how these things go. There is no neat ending where all rot gets cut out. Sarah testified. So did I. Curtis gave statements and left out the parts that would have buried us all. My ex never really forgave me for how close I let the danger get before I acted. She was right not to. We never got back together. That was not even on the table. But she let me keep seeing our daughter after a long, ugly stretch. And that was more mercy than I deserved. People ask, when they know enough to ask at all, why I stayed as long as I did. The answer is never satisfying. I stayed because the money solved immediate pain, because fear grows gradually, and you adjust to each new level before the next one arrives. Because once you take dirty cash, part of you starts thinking like prey. Keep still. Don't attract notice. Survive the night. Because I kept telling myself I would fix it tomorrow. And tomorrow is the favorite word of cowards. There is one more thing. A few months after the arrests, I got a padded envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single USB drive and a paper slip with one sentence typed on it. Not everyone was there. I did not plug that drive into anything I owned. I handed it over through Denise. She called 2 days later and asked where I got it. I told her the truth. She went quiet for a long time. Then she said the drive contained surveillance clips from another site, in another state, older than ours, but set up almost the same way. Same style of rooms, same methods. Different men, though one face in the background matched a name from Leon's files. The operation had roots deeper than they first thought. She told me to be careful. As if that had not already occurred to me. I still work nights sometimes. Not security in the old sense. Maintenance, deliveries, whatever keeps me moving. I do better when I am moving. Enclosed concrete spaces bother me. Freight elevators are bad. The smell of bleach mixed with rust can take a whole day away from me if it hits wrong. I have hit men since then in ordinary fights and been shocked by how quickly it all comes back to the surface. The knowledge of where to aim, how hard to swing, how easy it is to stop seeing a face once violence starts in earnest. That is the part I try hardest to live with. People like Leon and Pavel were monsters, yes, but not in the childish sense. They were human beings who built jobs out of pain and called it work. The dangerous thing is how ordinary the edges of that life looked from the outside. A gate office, a clipboard, a coffee cup, a man taking a shift because rent was due. If I had turned down the diner meeting, someone else would have taken the chair. Maybe someone dumber. Maybe someone crueler. Maybe someone who would have lasted longer and helped them more. That thought does not absolve me. It just reminds me how cheap the entrance fee can be. I think about Nico a lot. About the prisoner asking for water. About Sarah looking at me in the bay and understanding I was not there to save her. About my daughter seeing me bloody in that locker room and shrinking against her mother because I looked like one of the men who took them. Those are the things that stay. Not the heroic parts, if there were any. Not the final fight. Not the police lights. What stays is every small moment when I had a chance to step sideways before the ground opened all the way. I tell this now because enough years have passed that some people involved are dead, imprisoned, or hidden behind new names. and because silence starts to rot a person from inside if he keeps feeding it. I am not telling it for pity. I do not deserve much of that. I am telling it because there are places operating right now behind respectable fences and painted over signs, using terms like private logistics and recovery services and asset protection, staffed by men who say it is only work. Sometimes it starts exactly that plain. A bad month, a phone number, cash in an envelope. Then one night you open the wrong door and find a man begging for water in a room with a drain in the floor. And after that, every choice gets more expensive. That is what happened to me. I took a security job for shady people because I was desperate. I stood watch while they tortured and murdered human beings. I told myself I was separate from it until they put me in the chair too. I escaped mostly because a cruel man got careless and because other people bled beside me. Some of the men I killed deserved worse than they got. That does not make the killing clean. Grounded truth, if you want the cleanest version, is this. There was nothing supernatural in that place. No curse, no demon, no ancient evil waiting under the floor. Just organized men, locked doors, money, fear, and the kind of appetite that needs victims to feel strong. That is bad enough. Worse, really. Because buildings like that do not need ghosts. They only need people who need the paycheck badly enough to look away for one more shift.